International trade is the backbone of the global economy, facilitating the exchange of goods, services, and ideas across borders. The world is now grappling with what some people have called the deadliest trade tariff war of the 21st century. But how will the potential breakdown of bilateral and multilateral trade pacts affect Nigeria and indeed Africa? Babajide Ogunsanwo, founder of Leadership by Data and Channels Television's data analyst, is here to share more intelligence about the state of world trade. Thank you very much, Babajide, for joining us on the news at 10.
Good evening, Anne.
Well, they say charity begins at home. So let's talk about how Africa will be affected with this tariff war, the new trade tariffs, and planned by President Donald Trump of the United States.
Clearly, President Donald Trump is taking some big actions. We're seeing reactions as well. But for Africa, there's some good and bad news. Now, the good news is, if we look at the tariffs, it will have very little impact on us directly. The bad news is it will affect us indirectly. And by indirectly, we're talking about the currency volatility. Yes, that could affect us indirectly. We're looking at even the global perception of democracy is changing. That's between the left-wing politicians and partisan politics and the right wing, which Donald Trump also clearly belongs to. But Anne, what Nigerians are really asking and what we should probably focus on is the good news, which is why I talk about, yes, this might actually not significantly affect Nigeria and Africa. So let's take a look at how much trade does Nigeria do with the United States, with Africa, with clearly even other countries in the world. In summary terms, where is Africa's position? You said it, charity begins at home. And if we focus on the chart of the week, what exactly is in front of us? The World Bank makes it clear. Between the first 10 years of the 21st century, between 2000 and 2009, global trade was the equivalent of $205 trillion. However, Africa only accounted for 3% of that trade. Look at the next decade, between 2010 to 2019, $359 trillion worth of global trade. Again, how much did Africa account for? Only 3%. Look at what happened in this decade, from 2020 to date. Global trade in excess of $179 trillion. However, Africa only 3%. In simple terms, Anne, 97% of the world's trade does not happen in Africa. But Anne, here's why African leaders need to really understand this beyond trade. 19% of the world's population, 19%, that's approximately 20% of the world's population, lives in Africa. Yet, only 3% of the trade is done in Africa, clearly showing that human potential is significantly suboptimal. So yes, the tariffs we've clearly seen would directly not significantly affect Africa and indeed Nigeria because we're not really doing much trade. However, what it points us is to remember that yes, we're only doing 3% of global trade. However, approximately 20% of the population resides here. A reminder that we are significantly suboptimizing our human potential.
So which brings me to my next question. I mean, how exposed is Nigeria? If we say 3%, that's a good number.
That's a bad number.
A bad number, I beg your pardon. But how exposed is Nigeria to goods and services that will be affected by these tariff trade?
So there are various ways to look at it. First, I talked about we will be impacted indirectly, especially because of exchange rate volatility, looking at also the global perception of democracy, how it influences it. But the question is, how much imports came into Nigeria, especially if you take a look at it from the last 3 years. The National Bureau of Statistics tells us that Nigeria imported 84 trillion naira worth of goods between 2021 and 2023. The challenge is, where are these goods coming from? And if we take a look at these facts, the facts, it will clearly allow us to understand that, yes, we shouldn't be bothered, but here are the reasons why we should be bothered. 84 trillion naira worth of goods in the last 3 years, 2021 to 2023. However, half of Nigeria's imports do not come from America, neither do they come from Europe. And in the last 3 years, half of all goods imported into Nigeria came from Asia. So in simple terms, when we're talking about our exposure to these global tariffs, we should look at our exposure to what we're importing, and the evidence shows that significantly more of what we're importing is from Asia and not Europe or America.
But could all these significantly contribute to the living conditions of people living in Nigeria, especially now that everyone is complaining about the economy?
Yes, it could. And again, follow this logic. We're looking at a lot of goods coming in from Asia. The question is, where in Asia are these goods coming from? The number one country is China. And so the question is, what exactly are we importing from China? And if we take a look at the facts, it is clear. The National Bureau of Statistics has put up some data together, and they make it clear that the number one good, or the number one category of items Nigerians are importing from Asia is manufactured goods. So in simple terms, if inflation rate is going higher in China, or if the cost of manufacturing is going higher because of these trade wars, clearly what these companies will be producing, their costs will rise, and some of these costs will be transferred will reflect in their product prices, and clearly potentially more manufactured goods coming into Nigeria from China will have higher cost. Higher cost clearly means those that are importing it, especially for non-personal household consumption, will transfer this cost to businesses. In simple terms,
the end users are still going to suffer.
The end users are going to suffer it. Businesses will suffer it. The end users will suffer it. And if businesses and end users suffer it,
that's everyone.
Politics will suffer it, and we'll be talking about the cost of winning an election. Again, looking at how tariffs goes around and even influences election. But perhaps the biggest insight tonight is for us to remember that Africa still accounts for only 3% of the world's trade, yet approximately 20% of the population. We need to significantly improve our expertise and get the younger Nigerians to participate in trade and services to be able to grow the economy and the country.
All right. Thank you very much. Babajide Ogunsanwo, founder of Leadership by Data and Channels Television's data analyst. Thanks a lot for your time.
The pleasure is always mine.
On the news at 10, I do.